Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, Fatima, for recording. Welcome everybody to part 2 of our workshop series. Part 1 was on Monday, covering, oh my gosh, I already forgot. It was covering covering virtual job searching and virtual interviews. We will be posting the recording of that session as soon as possible, hopefully by tomorrow, on our social medias and on our website as well. So tonight, welcome you all to the space. We have some very important guest speakers tonight joining us to talk about navigating institutional and workplace discrimination. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Erica. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a third year here at UC Santa Cruz. I'm studying film and psychology. When I'm not being an APERC intern, I am also a tour guide here for our university. In addition to that, I'm also a college's 9 and 10 residential assistant, and I'm also the Career Center Divisional Liaison for the Social Sciences, and I'm also a communication specialist at our Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. And lastly, I'm also the co-executive producer for the Film Production Coalition here on our campus. So just a laundry list of things that I do here at UC Santa Cruz. And now I'll go ahead and pass it on to Edward to introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Edward. I'm also an APERC intern. I am a programs intern for APERC. Some other things that I do on campus. What I do is I'm a learning assistant. I usually do some STEM classes. I'm usually a learning assistant for certain STEM classes. Also, I am at shop doing our shop. I don't know if you've heard, is the Student Health Outreach and Promotion at campus. We just do various things. So check that out as well, just a plug. And yeah, that's about it. I'm gonna pass it off to Camille, our other APERC intern.
Hi, I'm Camille. I'm an outreach intern at APERC at UCSC. I'm currently a 4th year, so this is my last quarter. And I'm a Fem Studies and Legal Studies double major. I identify as like a first-gen college student, so I feel like it's very in relations to what Edward and Erica are planning this entire week. And then I'm also a study abroad advisor, peer advisor at UCSC. Check.
Awesome, thanks Camille. And now we're gonna go ahead and pass it on to first Fatima, one of our Career Center peer coaches.
Hi everyone, my name is Fatima. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a career success peer coach at the UCSC Career Center. And I'm here with another peer coach if she wants to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Samantha Cabrera and I'm one of the peer coaches at the UCSC Career Center. I also advise students with their resumes, cover letters, job search, internship search, those kinds of things.
Awesome. Thank you, Fatima and Sam, for joining us. Again, everyone participating today, if you have any questions related to career advice, resume building, mock interviews, Fatima and Sam are great resources to build off of for today. I know a lot of you are graduating this quarter, graduating soon, and it's a big milestone for y'all. So we want to make sure that we can prepare you as best as possible for the impending doom of jobs and looking for a job. So thank you all for sharing your introductions. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to start sharing my screen to introduce our housekeeping rules. Let's see, first, got to get there. Sorry, 1 second. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. Let's go ahead and present. Cool. Okay. So first off, welcome. This was the slide that you were supposed to see coming in, but that's totally okay. Next up, we have our intros. This is us, and we went through this already. So we're going to move on to housekeeping. Please keep your microphone muted for best quality. You are invited to turn on your video, but it's not required. Please use the raise hand function when you have a question for the panelists or interns. You may also use the chat to ask questions. And at the very end of this workshop, we will be providing a feedback survey for you to fill out, just to give us some insights on whether or not you thought this workshop was good and what we can do to better improve our workshops for the future. All right, so first off, we're going to get right into it, and just want to preface this with a disclaimer that the terms that we're going to go over today may not apply to all AAPI folks, as workplace discrimination is a different experience for different AAPI communities. So some of the terms we're talking about today, it's not to generalize every and all experience, but rather to just give an overview of some of the terms that might help you understand or kind of introduce you to some of the things we'll be talking about later today. In addition to that, some of the things we might be talking about may be triggering for some folks, so we do want to give you the space to step out if you feel compelled to do so, and we will definitely invite you back in as soon as we can, or as soon as you'd like to. All right, so we're going to get into it. So breaking the bamboo ceiling, what does this mean? Asian Americans account for only 1.4% of Fortune 500 CEOs and 1.9% of corporate officers overall. So AAPI folks often get passed over for promotions and managerial positions because they are perceived as unable to lead or command respect from their colleagues. Next term. So what is harassment? What is considered harassment? I've bolded some of the terms that I feel like are very common for many folks, which include hostile environment, retaliation, quid pro quo, oh my gosh, cannot say that word, quid pro quo, and sexual harassment. Some of these are very real experiences for a lot of folks in our industries today. And one of the most important things is to recognize is everyday bigotry, which is making race-based jokes and comments, imitating coworkers by evoking an accent, or openly displaying offensive or derogatory materials such as pictures or literature that suggest the inferiority of certain races, religions, genders, sexual orientations, and other identities. Edward, do you want to do this slide?
Yeah, of course. And so racism in the workplace. So what does this really mean? So AAPI folks are more likely to face discrimination and racism than their white coworkers. Discrimination and racism is highest among Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders and Indians. And there's a statistic right there. And who it is affecting? 4 in 10 AAPI folks report that they or a member of a household have experienced at least one negative workplace experience in the past year, and about 3 in 10 say they have experienced about between 1 or 3 of these incidents, while 1 in 10 have say they have dealt with 4 or more in the past year. So it is affecting a lot more than what we may think. And institutional racism. So what does this really mean? It's racism in the form of social and political institutions. So when you see like differences in wealth, income, your education, the types of healthcare that you receive, those are all forms of institutional racism. And specifically in the workplace, we can see that race reports, or race-based like reports, when you're reporting things to upper management for review, they are usually not really considered as heavily in the workplace, and they don't place a huge emphasis on that.
Okay, thank you, Edward. So moving on. So those are just some of the terms that we'd like to introduce all of you to, just to get yourself familiarized with some of the different legal terms and, layman's terms for some of the things that we have to navigate in the workplace and in institutions like graduate school and medical school. So here's an example scenario that we have. If you have experienced workplace harassment or discrimination, what steps would you take to file a report? So one of the steps you can take is documentation, writing down anything you are able to recollect to show as proof, keeping these notes in a private space just in case your company tries to retaliate in any form. Talking to others, so talking to potential witnesses that can support or join your claim. Reading your employee handbook or your employee guidelines or whatever form that takes in your workplace. So reading what it says to do about reporting procedures. And in unfortunate times, it might be that the person you would normally report to is the perpetrator themselves. So in that instance, you would approach HR, so human resources, or upper management. And in some cases, and worst case scenarios, hopefully it wouldn't need to go this far, but you might need to possibly prepare for litigation. If the company does not act on your report, you can continue to document their actions in case you need to take any further legal action. Yeah, so that's the example scenario we have provided for y'all today. And now, the part that you all came here for, is to introduce our guest speakers. So we hope that the terms that we've shared so far are understood and you're able to kind of hopefully use some of these terms in your future endeavors and in conversations and dialogue surrounding the space. But yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our first guest speaker. Eva Long. Eva is from Honolulu, Hawaii, and she is also the coordinator of the Asian Pacific Islander Desi American Cultural Center at DePaul University, which is located in Chicago, Illinois. Eva obtained a bachelor's in arts in political science from the University of San Francisco and a master's in education, I believe, is that right? Oh, master's in student development administration from Seattle University. Eva identifies as Chinese American, and Eva is also a former Banana Slug staff. So welcome, Eva. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I've been having little glitches all morning, so hopefully it's gonna be smooth sailing from here. First off, I want to thank you, Erica, and the Asian American Pacific Islander Resource Center, the Career Center at UC Santa Cruz, for the invitation to speak on this topic. I feel so excited. One second, let me just turn on my timer because I don't want to get in trouble from APARC. There we go. I feel so excited to be welcomed back into this virtual space with fellow Banana Slugs and seeing some fellow students that I got to work with during my time at UC Santa Cruz. The place has had a special place in my heart, and it was actually my first job out of grad school, and I got to work with amazing students who left a tremendous imprint on my heart, and Erica was one of those students, so I'm so excited to receive the invitation from Erica. I was a former staff member, and I actually remember attending this very program as a staff member that was put on by APERC, and it was super beneficial. So excited that a lot of you, especially graduates, are able to join us in this space. This conversation topic is not only timely because of the time of the year for our graduates, but since COVID-19, our community has been harmed by the rise of anti-Asian racism, rhetoric, and violence. This is currently impacting Asian Americans in the workforce, but COVID-19 will continue to be used as a scapegoat that creates a barrier for those seeking an employment opportunity right now. So I want to recognize what's going on in the world and also hold that in this space together. To start off, I want to share with you my most salient identities. And they are being daughter of immigrants, being first generation, and a young Asian American in the workforce, that all intersectional identities have impacted me in one way or another. Our lived experiences are all different. Erica has pointed to that earlier, but I hope I can share a few insights that you can take away. I'll be sharing a little bit about navigating institutional discrimination in the workplace, and also 5 different ways in which you can kind of launch your career search during this pandemic. So there are three types of frameworks that impact Asian Americans as they navigate institutions and the workplace. And I thought I would touch on those three really quickly before proceeding. And I think the APRIC interns have done a really nice job in laying out the landscape for us. Absolutely tremendous. One of them is the model minority myth. There continues to be an image that Asian Americans are career savvy, high achievers, that are often backed by media to discredit the civil rights movement and have been used to pit Asian Americans against other marginalized groups. Often those opponents of the civil rights movement use Asian Americans as a platform to argue that the high achievements of Asian Americans serve as evidence that inequality based on skin color is non-existent, but we all know that that is not the case. It's the idea, that was the very idea of how the model minority came to be about. The portrayal that we are the model minorities have been criticized because the stereotype denies and distorts the real racial realities that Asian Americans face. The model minority stereotype makes the false statement that experiences of racial marginalization and discrimination do not impact our economic success. The model minority myth, as we all know, is simply serves as a long tool to silence and deny the lived experiences of the racial marginalization of Asian and Asian Americans. The next is to really talk about racial stereotypes in the workplace. The stereotype that all Asian Americans are highly competent and do not experience any barriers in the workplace is absolutely false. As Erica and Edward had shared the statistics, there has been numerous and significant research that has found that Asian American employees receive lower salaries compared to their white counterpart, even with similar educational backgrounds and job titles. And it continues to emphasize that there are greater disparities between Asian Americans and others in the workforce. The interns also touched on the bamboo ceiling, where researchers show that there are fewer and fewer Asian Americans that actually get to step into higher leadership roles. And I also wanted to share that I've had a few incidents that have happened to me as a professional in the workforce. One example being, I was a summer graduate intern at a university located in Oregon, small private university, and my specific project was to develop diversity and inclusion curriculum for their RA training, their first ever. I was in a committee with 2 other men, and I recall so vividly that each time we were about to begin a meeting, one or the other would always ask me to take notes for the group. And note-taking was a form of silencing my ideas and contribution to the very task of creating diversity. So because I was preoccupied with being on a laptop, making sure that I'm capturing all the notes possible, I did not have the opportunity to participate in the very project that I was tasked to do. When developing the learning outcomes for a diverse curriculum, one of the paths actually took startling as someone who was a graduate student at the time, and my positionality within the institution as a visitor and as a guest, as someone who was temporary, and to have a professional staff take credit for what I had worked so hard on as a capstone project at that time. I've also sat on my behalf without having asked them to. They continue to proceed to say, Eva feels this way, and no, Eva means this. They continue to speak for what they understood as what I was feeling, but absolutely the wrong interpretation. They could not have understand what I was feeling in those moments. I've had male supervisors who've dismissed my concerns as being dramatic, but when the same concerns have been expressed by male colleagues, it suddenly warrants attention because women are just too emotional. And too often do I see white women and men get promoted to leadership positions within their network, while folks of color have to apply and go through the process and have worked at the institution for far greater years. I share a lot of those incidents, and it saddens me that there are one too many that I've experienced in my short 5 years of being in the professional workforce after graduate school. Continuously, my identities as being a young Asian woman has impacted my experience navigating the institutions. I've constantly been in meetings where I felt my competence is being questioned, and that gets very extremely emotionally exhausting. I think the most frustrating part is knowing that the men I speak with or are unaware of how their presence or their tone or body language speaks volumes and how they assert their power. In these moments, I not only feel the need to sound more articulate, but also over-prepared to avoid sounding ill-prepared or incompetent. In these moments, I come to believe, to know stereo threats and confirmation bias always will work against me as someone who continuously looks young in the profession. And the funny part, I always end up overcompensating. And then when I do tend to overcompensate in meetings in different spaces, I then get perceived to be as tense and uptight. And after the actual encounters, I then beat myself up for overthinking the situations that are far worse than they actually are. And so I think I share all those stories to not scare anyone into the workforce, but I've learned a lot. I found my voice along the way, and I've really stayed attuned to how I was feeling in that moment, to then offer some tips for you all in navigating and addressing workplace discrimination. Before interviewing for jobs, I think research and asking the questions in any given moment, our body responds to it in numerous ways. Our heart might be pulsing quicker, palms sweaty, tensions arise, numbness, and most likely our triggers come up for us, and we can remember intent versus impact are two separate things. And if you don't feel comfortable bringing it up, depending on the situational context, remember to document it, like the interns have mentioned earlier. Documentation is so important. Often when the concerns are brought up by folks of color, it is dismissed continuously, time and time again. And if you're able to document specific incidents and or email exchanges, be sure that you're able to report it. I also want to emphasize how important reporting is. It is so, so important. First, it may be a conversation with your supervisor if you feel comfortable to, or it's really important to address it and also name the actual incident. Was it a racist incident? Was it a homophobic incident? Was it a xenophobic incident? To be really, really specific in naming it. These incidents will continue to persist because individuals will think that it's okay if we don't name it and disrupt it. Second, if we witness workplace discrimination that is happening to others, it is so important for us to be active bystanders. I think that silence can be really painful, and the times when we experience microaggression and triggers, the times that no one has spoken up for us, we need to continue to speak up for others in terms of when those situations arise. So how can we also be allies and bystanders for others? Reporting is crucial, again, either to HR or whatever confidential resource there are within the institution. Something that has been so helpful for me in navigating workplace discrimination is self-care, and community care is so, so important. finding a healthy outlet for you to dress and heal from the harm. For me, during my time at UC Santa Cruz, it was cardio kickboxing at the gym, and taking my lunch away from the office, walking through the forest. Also assessing what you need from your supervisor to feel supported, being able to name specifically how you want to be supported after the incident has arisen. Finding your people at work that you can lean on to vent, to support you and create spaces for you to be seen and to be heard. And lastly, it's not your job at all to educate folks on why particular events were harmful. But if you want to, and if you feel called to do so, thinking about what are the opportunities at your workplace to address and provide infrastructure to educate, train, and support folks so that it is addressed for the future. I'm running short on time, so I won't be able to kind of get into this segment of going into a successful job search during COVID-19, but I welcome that questions during the Q&A portion. But thank you all.
Thank you so much, Eva. That was amazing. Thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again. All right. Cool. All right, so next up, our presenter is Lena Yin. She uses she, her pronouns, and she is a third-year medical student at the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF. She obtained her bachelor's in biology at Stanford University. Lena identifies as a Chinese American, Asian American, and fun fact, Lena loves boba. So Lena, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Sorry, my cat is, she's been misbehaving a lot since I moved, or like not moved, but like started to stay at home a lot more. So if you see her walking across the screen, I can't do anything about that. Eva, you are such a hard act to follow. I was so impressed by your eloquence and how well you planned out your talk. You pretty much covered all corners when it comes to workplace discrimination and workplace racism. So huge kudos to you. So as a medical student, I think I will just try to speak from the perspective of somebody who is going to enter the medical field and somebody who was applied to a professional like training school. So, you know, it's a very timely moment to talk about that, I think. You know, over 1,700 hate crimes have been documented in the COVID era, specifically related to COVID against Asian Americans. And a lot of those crimes happen against people who look like us, who are my colleagues and my mentors and teachers. And that is a really frightening thing to know during this time. I actually first became aware that like COVID was starting to become, you know, feared and causing a lot of anxiety when I was in a lunchtime conference in the hospital, which is where we work during our third year of medical school. And the professor didn't say a word to me the whole time, but we took a break in the middle. And I was wearing a mask because of asthma, and I didn't want to cough all over my patients. And the professor, who again had not looked at me the whole time, turned around and said, "Oh, are you worried about COVID?" And this was like mid-February. And I was just so taken aback. But in the moment, I wasn't even thinking. So I just said, "Are you asking me that because I'm Chinese?" Because I speak before I think a lot of the time. And everyone in the room laughed. And the professor didn't make eye contact with me for the rest of the conversation, which I think speaks a lot to her intent in that moment. But I think also, you know, after I shared this story with some of my friends, they said it also spoke to the power of humor in these moments. You know, sometimes you can turn, when you question what the person who is performing a microaggression against you is thinking, you can turn it against them and make it like obvious how ridiculous they're being, which I think is a helpful strategy that I came upon by accident, but I will definitely use in the future. So other things that have come up, you know, within a healthcare setting is this really interesting thing that happens when you're a woman of color, particularly in healthcare, is like every single friend of mine who identifies as a woman of color has been called nurse. But at the same time, when you take offense to that, it sort of speaks poorly. It's as if you're speaking poorly of our nursing colleagues. And so that is something that I struggle with a lot, is when my friends say, you know, like, I just got called nurse again today, and I had to say, no, I'm a medical student, or no, I'm a doctor. My instinct is to go, well, like, why did you find that offensive? And it's because the person assuming that you are a nurse is like making it an insult, right? Is assuming that that means that you're less than, that you're not as high achieving, that you're not as intelligent, that you didn't have to work as hard. But you can turn that, in the same way that I turned that microaggression against the professor, you can turn that microaggression on its head too against whoever's calling you a nurse, and say, well, you know, I'm actually not a nurse, but I'm honored that you thought that I was smart enough and capable enough and good enough at patient care to be one. So thank you. So that's another incident that I have seen come up a lot in my training. Otherwise, you know, there are lots of incidences even before COVID where patients have said, I don't want to see an Asian doctor. You know, I want somebody who's white. And this happens to all people of color in these settings. And it's really hard. It's really hard, particularly when you're in a profession where you're there to serve. And it hurts because you entered the profession to help others and to be there for people, and because you believe in the goodwill of people, and to be told by the person that you entered this profession to work for that you're less than, that they don't want you to be there to help them, is really painful. So that's also really hard to deal with. And at the same time, you know, patients have the right. It's not, you can't necessarily report a patient for discrimination in the same way that you could report a colleague, because that's their right. They can refuse care from anyone. And that's really, really hard. But in those moments, and I think in moments of discrimination in general, my most important piece of advice would be to find your allies and find your support system. I think that is so, so hard. And if you can't find any, then maybe ask yourself why you're at an institution or at a workplace where you can't find any allies, because that by itself also speaks volumes. And if you can, obviously, as Eva has stated so well, you know, be an ally and be a supporter for others. I can think of a really great example off the top of my head. I was shadowing a resident. So in case you're not familiar with like the medical training sort of hierarchy, a resident is a step above a medical student, but still not quote unquote a full doctor. And this resident and the full doctor who was supervising our team and me all went to go see this patient. And the doctor, it was a woman. She was an Asian woman, actually. And the patient kept calling her baby. Which you know, that's like one of those like in between things where like it could be a microaggression, but could also just be the way that he talks to everyone. But regardless, it's about how it makes you feel, right? And you can see the doctor's kind of uncomfortable with this. And the resident, who was a white man, did, I think, one of the most impressive things I've seen in my life, which was he was conducting the interview, and he said, hang on, stop. Mr. Smith, I just want to acknowledge something. You know, she's my boss. She's my boss, and you know, you shouldn't call her baby like that. It's inappropriate. And I was like, wow, it has been so long since I've seen a white man stand up for a woman of color in this way and like really use his privilege. And like that was just, and the patient was like, oh no, like sorry, I didn't mean it that way. That's just how I talk, like, you know. And the guy was like, I know, that's okay, but I just want to let you know that, you know, it's inappropriate, and like she's my boss, so you know, I respect her and you gotta respect her. And I was like, oh my God. So that's, I think, a really great example of how when any of us are in positions of power, whether that is in terms of like relative structural privilege in the world, or even just, you know, being a like level higher as a student or a learner, you can speak up for other people in the moment. And if you can't, like, that's also okay, right? Sometimes these things happen and we're just in shock and we can't respond. So afterward, just make sure to check in with that person. You also don't have to assume that it was offensive. You can just say, hey, like, that just happened. I felt kind of weird about it. I was wondering if you felt any sort of way about it. And then maybe they'll feel more comfort, even though that horrible thing just happened, knowing that there's someone else who could see the same thing that they did, that they're not crazy, they're not being gaslighted, that was really wrong, and that there's somebody in their surroundings who sees that and supports them. So that's really important. I also want to speak to a specific issue within like higher education and medical school in particular, which is sort of related to the model minority myth, as Eva had described earlier, which is that the Asian American Pacific Islander umbrella is so broad. It's so broad, right? I think we all know that as members of this community, but people who are not in this community don't know that. And I also, you know, during college was very involved in the Asian Americans Center at my school and like really involved in API activism. And it shocked me to go to a school, even like UCSF in San Francisco, which is like 1/3 Asian. And to see that even leaders in diversity and equity like don't understand the true diversity of our community. And it is true that in medical schools and graduate schools in general, you know, certain groups of Asian Americans, like East Asians and certain groups of South Asians are overrepresented at these institutions. Not even talking about the bamboo ceiling, which is that like that overrepresentation disappears when you look at like professors and tenureships and attending status and things like that. But just looking at the student body. On the other hand, you know, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians, and other subgroups of Asian America, such as Southeast Asians, are underrepresented. And that's not recognized by a lot of schools, by most schools across America, actually. They just don't see that these are different groups with different histories and trajectories and disadvantages that should be taken into account. And I remember having like the wildest moment when I was in the Office of Diversity and Equity at UCSF of the School of Medicine, talking to our dean of diversity and equity, and her associate dean looked at me and said, "Oh, Southeast Asia, is that like Pakistan?" Real story. So I think just recognizing that, that like there will be people who just like come to this with different levels of knowledge, even people who we expect to be knowledgeable about this issue, and that you are going to unfortunately have to advocate for yourself a lot in sharing your story and like sharing where you come from and why it's important. But the good news is also that I wasn't in that room alone, right? I was in that room with a bunch of other students, like all from diverse API backgrounds, who were all together. We were trying to push for more recognition of Southeast Asian groups and diversity in our student body. And so you too can find your allies, whether that's, you know, your manager who's supposed to be there to support you, or that professor who's like really speaking out about the racial issues at your university. I would say like, you know, activism and everything that comes from it is about relationship building. So find those relationships and don't be afraid to reach out. I have no idea what time I'm at, but I think I'm just going to end here. And I don't know if they're going to share our emails or whatever, but obviously feel free to ask me questions when it's question time, and feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in healthcare professions. I'm always available.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lena. That was very informative, and also really informative for me personally, because I'm interested in the medical field as well. So I think, yeah, okay. So that was actually, you're good on time. We're doing pretty good on time so far. Our next guest speaker is Emily Pang. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, so Emily uses she, her pronouns, and Emily is a first-year graduate student at the University of Southern California, obtaining a master's in social work currently. Emily identifies as Hong Kong American, and Emily is a UCSC alum, class of 2018. I'm also very excited to present Emily today. Emily and I were in the Chinese Student Association together when she was still here a couple years ago, and that's how we met and how we bonded. So welcome, Emily. I'm gonna give the space to you.
Thank you for inviting me to speak at this panel. I think it's definitely been very useful hearing others' experiences of discrimination and how to be allies. So I'm going to talk about my experiences being AAPI, and then if I have time, maybe talk more about generally about grad school. So I was an intensive psychology major when I was at Santa Cruz, and I also studied abroad in Hong Kong during my junior year. After graduation, for the most part, I feel that I've been very fortunate to have it not impact my job hunt, since being in the Bay Area is very diverse, so I felt like that didn't impact me. But as a psychology major, it was definitely very difficult to find jobs. I think it took me about 2 or 3 months after graduation to find my first job. And even then, I didn't really like it. So that kind of pushed me to want to go to grad school so I could find a job that I actually liked if I'm going to be stuck with it for the next 40 years or so. So as was mentioned earlier, I'm a master's in social work student at USC, specifically the adult mental health and wellness track. And I found that there's very few Asians in the MSW program overall. So for reference, most of my classes are about 20 students, and then there's the professor. And in a lot of my classes, there's maybe 5 Asian Americans at most. So you really don't see that many. And that goes for the professors as well. In my first year, I think I only had 1 Asian American professor out of like maybe 8 or 9 professors that I had over the whole year. And in classes, we have case vignettes. So basically we were presented a case and then we were asked to like maybe what we should do in terms of treatment for them. But I found that a lot of these case vignettes don't often talk about Asian Americans. They usually have white clients, Latino clients, African American clients. Like a lot of social work focuses on cultural competency, so being able to work with people from different cultural backgrounds, which is very important, but there's just not enough emphasis on working with Asian Americans, even though Asian Americans are a rapidly growing minority in the US, and we should learn, I feel that we need to just learn more about working with Asian Americans. Let's see. In terms of like workplace discrimination, I feel that I haven't had too much experience with that, but when I, at my field placement, since internships are a big part of social work, one time one of my co-interns said something to me. I'm not even sure how the topic came up, but he said the best Chinese food is from dirty Chinese kitchens. And at the time, I was just like, I was a little too taken aback to really say anything in particular, but like say something meaningful. But I was like, why would you say something like that? I was just so taken aback by how he said that. Sorry, getting my thoughts together. So I wasn't sure at the time why it made me feel some kind of way, but after talking about it with some of my friends, I realized it was a microaggression. So even if he didn't mean for it to be like straight up racist or discriminatory, it still came off in that way, even if he didn't mean for it to be. And it was just weird hearing that, because a lot of times when you talk about like maybe non-ethnic minority foods, you wouldn't call the kitchens dirty, but he somehow thought that that referring to Chinese food being cooked in kitchens as dirty was okay. So even though at the time I didn't know what to say, I'm hoping that I can take this experience and learn how to speak up better in the future, even though it can feel really intimidating, especially in the moment, or maybe like later on you think, dang it, I should have said something, I should have said that. Like sometimes after how you hear something, you think of something better to say after an argument. So it just goes to show that even in places where you're supposed to be learning to work with others, no matter their cultural backgrounds, you can still experience discrimination and microaggressions. So that was definitely something new for me to experience. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about grad school in general, since I still have some time on the clock left. So right after I graduated from UC Santa Cruz, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do career-wise, because I know I wanted to do something related to mental health, but I couldn't quite narrow it down. So I ended up applying to 5 or 6 different grad schools because I was really worried that I wouldn't get in. And especially after how hard the job hunt was that I did before that, it just made me more worried that I wasn't going to get in anywhere. But I found that no matter how long the job hunt takes, don't be discouraged. You just got to keep applying, because if you it's definitely discouraging to not hear back, or they're like, oh, sorry, someone else got the position, but you just got to keep pushing until you find a job. And then I found that talking with friends in the same boat in terms of job hunting or applying to grad school was very helpful in kind of lessening the stress and anxiety, because it kind of made me feel like I wasn't as alone, even though it's definitely a very stressful and scary time, since after undergrad, you're kind of like, oh, I'm an adult now. It's time to do things like job hunt and apply to grad school. So some of the things that I kind of wish I'd known when applying to grad school, like, don't over apply. Like, you'll get in somewhere. You just gotta kind of maybe look at 3 or 4 different schools and narrow down your field. Like, for example, I applied to some schools to get that had master's in social work program, master's in clinical psychology, and marriage and family therapy, which they're all kind of related, but I think it would have been better to just kind of narrow my search into maybe 1 or 2 fields that I was interested in, especially when you consider that you have to ask professors and supervisors for letters of rec, so you don't want them to have to write so many. Additionally, look at scholarships when you're doing the job hunt for grad school, because a lot of schools will offer scholarships maybe based on populations you've worked with, like, oh, we'll give you a scholarship if you've worked with military population, veteran population, aging population. So I wish I'd known that, because a lot of the scholarships that USC offered were for populations that I didn't get to work with. So I kind of wish I'd known that during my job hunt. And keep track of deadlines. Like, there's so many things to keep track of, like when you have to turn in your transcripts, when letters of rec are due, when your personal statements are due. So try to write them down so they're kind of right in front of you, and then you're not like, when's this one due? When's that one due? And if you have friends who are applying for grad school the same year as you, like, maybe talk with them, look over each other's papers so that you can get feedback, and then you can just kind of commiserate about the process of grad school. So that kind of concludes my brief presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the grad school process later on, or you can email me too.
Thank you, Emily. That was really awesome. Next up, and lastly but not least, we have Colette Kwok. Let me share my screen one more time. So Colette uses she, they pronouns, and Colette is a freelance writer and game designer. She will also be entering the University of Southern California as a first-year graduate student this upcoming year, obtaining a master's in interactive media. Colette identifies as Chinese and Cambodian, and Colette is also currently our program coordinator for our resource center here at UC Santa Cruz, and she was also a UCSC alum, I believe also class of 2018, is that correct? Okay, yeah, cool, awesome. So welcome, Colette, to the stage.
Hello. I'm just gonna pull up the questions I got. So yes, I'm the program coordinator for AFRIC as well. So if you've been getting emails, graduates, you will be getting some from me. Hello. So I'm gonna kind of balance job stuff as well as grad school, because like I literally just went through the grad program, like the graduate application process. So I'll do my best to kind of balance both. And if you have any questions, just feel free to pop it in, like just pop it in the chat or when we have Q&A. So I have a fun job career thing from 2018 when I graduated till now. I got my degree in a BA in film and digital media with a concentration in production. But I've decided to do this kind of like, I like doing film. I was a filmmaker for a bit while, like in high school before I came in, but for some reason I just never really I felt out of place. A lot of it was just to do because of the entertainment industry, and like the film industry is and has been a majority of like white male dominated. So it was a little bit isolating for the sense. But funny enough, literally the spring quarter of my 3rd year, so I was basically about to graduate. I decided that I didn't want to do film. I wanted to actually transition into doing game design because I've always had an interest in like interactive media and game design and all that. So luckily we do have the game design program here at Santa Cruz. So I kind of just tagged along with all the seniors and worked with them on projects. But after graduation, it was kind of rough. I would apply for jobs specifically as a writer and for another term narrative designer. And I actually never got an interview for any of the places I applied to. So I can't really give insight on like in terms of like the interview process for game design a lot. But so I kind of jumped from odd jobs. Besides being a freelance, I worked as a freelance writer in addition to doing a day job. Before I came as a program coordinator, I actually worked in the Bay Area as an academic mentor for this after school program. So I was working in education for actually elementary to middle school. So just working with like students, working with kids after school as I was doing like writing gigs. And it was a lot to balance, kind of like working basically 2 jobs. I still do it now. But so that has really helped me doing the whole shelter in place. I actually, since I've been working at home, at least for writing, I kind of know how to schedule myself. So I'm kind of thankful for that. But going back to kind of like the games industry, it is also very dominated by white male game designers. So at the time, so like maybe around 2018, early 2019, I was very salty because I've noticed that a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my colleagues, the people who would get jobs either right out of college or in the span of a few months were white men who would get actually jobs in the games industry, and a lot of women of color and all the kind of the intersections who are amazing like artists and like programmers and stuff haven't been getting anything. A lot of them are still looking even till this day. So I was a bit salty about that. Like I was pretty much seething with very discontent for quite a bit. But I actually had a plan that like I was going to spend a year just kind of like looking for work and just kind of personally building a portfolio before see if I can get a job, or if not, I ended up going to grad school because I was interested in kind of going into like grad school anyways, kind of like get more into it. So eventually I kind of just applied for, grad school and everything. I actually applied for 2 or 3 schools, partly because obviously one of them was USC, and the application process for the interactive media program is a lot. I think I wrote like 6 essays, and 2 of them were like for scholarships. So it was a lot of work. So, and then I applied for USC, and I also applied for NYU, and I actually was lucky enough to get into both of the programs. So kind of going back to one of the questions about how do we look into jobs or like schools to see if they fit in terms of like diversity and inclusion. I actually asked them in the interview, like, what are some diversity and inclusion stuff you've been working on. I actually had a brief conversation not too long ago with one of the managers, which was like, which was actually during the shelter in place. I asked them like, what is the program in the school doing right now for because of COVID? And he gave me an answer that was like, they couldn't really do much. They just said like nothing big has happened, but they are like keeping track of like what happens. And I don't know how good I'm on time because I totally forgot to start the timer. But I'm good? Okay. So in terms of like funding and like for grad school, yeah, it's a lot. USC is a private school, so it is a lot of money. I'm currently going through the process of finding a lot of scholarships. So you should do that. USC, at least for my school, so my school is different than like Emily's in the sense like our scholarships might be different. But at least for my program, they didn't have a lot of incoming scholarships that they gave the students. So I have to look for outside sources and just kind of pray that I find some money. And another thing, so I saw, this is a kind of a tangent, but I kind of just remembered this, is that I had like a virtual open house with the people who are admitted to my program, and I've noticed that I actually am the only Asian American in at least the cohort that was there that got accepted. There was a couple of international students, but a lot of international students from China, which were there, but in terms of like for like Asian American, like Asian diaspora, I was the only one, because just it's a little bit different from those who are from like China or like international students. Their experiences are different than those who are like second generation and more. So I noticed I was the only Asian American there. So that I totally forgot who said it, but yeah, when you get into grad school, kind of like the population of just Asian American Pacific Islander students go drastically down, just because, you know, it is also is very costly to go to continue your education. Just my last thing, I was the only one. I'm actually personally paying for all my grad school, so that's why it's like, it was actually a stressful and just like an investment for me to go to grad school. I know I ended on a kind of like a low note, but I can talk more about like my work as freelance in the Q&A because I don't want to take up too much time. But all my advice, if you want to go to grad school, is just actually research the schools that you want to go to rather than kind of just throwing a net in, because you can focus on, you know, the schools that you want to get into a lot, rather than just kind of casting a wide net and hoping, because you got to write essays and essays and essays. And for someone like me, I don't have the attention span to be doing like 10 of them. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Colette, for sharing. That was really great. So that's all of our guest speakers for today. I'm going to go ahead and move us into the Q&A portion of our event. So if you have any questions for any of our panelists today, please feel free to either drop it in the chat, or you can use the raise hand function, or you can simply just unmute yourself and just ask away. Honestly, I'm just welcoming all and every question today. So yeah, please feel free to ask any questions.
Hi. So I'm Camille. Just to break the ice here, I have a question about grad school and like basically post undergrad. So as a first generation college student, my aim was just to go to university, and I didn't dream that big. I just wanted a bachelor's degree because it's just something my family never had, so I'm the first one to obtain the diploma. And I was talking to my family about getting a master's, right? And I was talking to them, and they didn't see the value in obtaining a master's. And they were like, oh, why can't you just go to your work with your bachelor's degree? Yes, I could do that, but at the same time, I want to research some more, as well as like just open up more doors. So I was just wondering like how you navigated that conversation, and how your parents kind of saw what a post degree after undergrad like is. Yeah.
I guess I can kind of speak to that a little bit. So I majored in psychology, and from that I wouldn't be making a lot of money because it's just not something you go into for to be rich. But during my gap year, it was just so difficult to find a job, even with a bachelor's in psychology, that my parents and I talked about it, and they decided and we decided it might be a good idea for me to consider grad school paying me so low, even though I already had a college degree. So I guess if you frame it as you'll have more job opportunities that could make you more financially secure in the long run, even though at first you're going to be spending money on grad school, whether it's like the application fees or the transcript fees or tuition.
Thank you for your question, Camille. As you're sharing your story, I can just vividly remember the time when I was getting ready to like sit down with my parents, be like, hey, I'm gonna graduate in a semester when I was in a semester school. And I was like, I'm thinking about going to grad school. And also as like a first generation college student, you know, my family were immigrants from China, and they hadn't finished, you know, they haven't gone past the 4th grade. So, you know, what we have strived to together as a family was to get, you know, me to get to college. And then that was the finish line, right? To all of us, what we've worked on for all of our lives, like that was the finish line. And, you know, a college, when I went to a private institution in San Francisco, so it was not cheap at all. And so it had already hit our family like financially to be able to afford that. And for them to kind of like wrap their minds around what, you know, continuation looks like, I think I've continued to rely on is to just tell my story of what I'm most passionate about. I think the easy selling point always for like families is that, you know, they want our families to kind of like move up in terms of class, provide more opportunities financially, economically, for all of us, for extended families. So job opportunities and income is always a selling point, but also telling the stories of what you're most passionate about, because I can stand sometimes thinking about college or grad school is really foreign to them. Even being able to tell them all of the amazing things that you have been involved in college, like they don't know what being an internet A perk is like, right? Or being able to do research, or being able to sit within a library space filled with books at your disposal, to continue to kind of like open those doors for them to kind of like imagine educational spaces and further learning. I think it can continue to pique their curiosity. So even to this day, like talking to them about the career field that I am entered in now, it continues to be a foreign concept, because for them, they have always been butchers and farmers, right? And so to be able to paint this great privilege, have it, and, you know, to be protected even during this time of like COVID, it's just for me always been helpful to continue to tell that story and to open imagining educational spaces that they weren't afforded necessarily under their circumstances.
Eva, sorry, go ahead, Colette.
No worries. So Camille, I actually have a lot of experience dealing with parents and expectations, partly because one, I'm doing something in the arts, and also doing something in game design, which is actually a fairly new kind of just industry in the sense, because it's been around for like not super long compared to the scope of like other careers, as well as going to grad school. So my parents, I remember when I was like, I want to be a filmmaker in high school, my parents are like, that's not gonna make you any money. And for me to kind of like show them that I'm serious is literally just showing them I'm serious, like actually kind of like just grinding it. Obviously I was making films and doing like art programs when I was in high school through college. So I kind of just did the same thing with game design, is just grinding out work, like working with the seniors, doing all of that, as well as like doing my freelance gig where I publish work with other folks. And so when I told them I was actually going to grad school, they were like also the same thing, like, why do you want to go? Like, is that, like, I remember they actually told me, like, why do you want, like, why are you, is the reason you're only going to grad school was to get a career in this field? Like, might as well just not do it, because it is going to cost you more money in loans. And I'm like, that's true. So how I kind of like navigated grad school was kind of just the same thing, was just kind of like showing that I was serious about doing this, and it's not just kind of like I'm doing this to like waste time, because at least for my parents in particular, that's what they always thought, was just like, you know, it's the very traditional Asian thinking of like, just go to school, go to university, just get a job right after. But like things are very different now, that not everyone gets, you know, work going like as soon as you get out of college, especially now during COVID-19. It's like everything's up in the air, lots, you know, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So for me, when I just told them, I was just kind of for my parents when I was applying to grad school, was just telling them like what's happening, what's going on. Like, oh yeah, I submitted my applications, all of them. Oh yeah, I now have an interview with this program. I have an interview with this program, and then I kind of like told them, oh, I got in, and all that. Kind of just bring them along in the steps to show them that like, here, this is what's going on, and like be excited. And I kind of also kind of told them about the programs too, to show them like, this is how it's going to help me. So like I was telling them about USC, about like, this program not only is just like academic, but it's like preparing you for a career. And they're like, these are all the connections that I have because of the school, and just basically kind of selling them the school, like the school's selling me, like the school's trying to sell me to go to their school. So eventually my parents, basically at this point, they're like, yeah, you should go. I think also partly because I'm going to USC, my parents are like, yes, USC, you should go. So if it's like similar to your parents, maybe like names really help them, because, you know, like our parents, a lot of us are immigrants, and they, you know, they just have a hard time understanding the intricacies of things. And obviously that's not to downplay them, it's just like they had different experiences. So they didn't have the opportunity to go to college, let alone like postgraduate school. So it's really just kind of, just to summarize, just grinding, honestly, to a reasonable grinding, because self-care is important.
Thank you, Colette. Lena, is there anything that you wanted to share for this question? If not, we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say like one thing is you can always like take a gap year or 2 gap years and work and then go back, which is what Emily did. And it's like getting to be a more and more popular strategy. I mean, it just helps you like save some money, and get like some work experience. And also if you do struggle with the job search, as many of us did, then it does show your parents like, oh, actually it's like not as easy sometimes as just getting a bachelor's and thinking that there's like a wealth of opportunities for you, as they might imagine. So I would say that like, that you should go for that if that's something that you think would be interesting to you, and would help make your like graduate school prospects more realistic.
Awesome. Thank you, Lena. All right, so we have another question that says, what if your supervisor is the one showing aggression? And this question is for anyone who'd like to answer.
I can speak to this a little bit, but Eva, I feel like you're like the expert if you have any like personal experiences with that. I'm speaking partially for myself because I actually did take a gap year to work in between like college and medical school, but I'm also speaking for just like my friends who I've heard like talk about their job experiences. I mean, that really sucks. That is a really hard situation to be in. And they showed the like Erica did a great job of like showing this PowerPoint of like the procedure to go through, like when you feel like you're being wronged in the workplace, like how to report that. And that same procedure can certainly go for, a supervisor, someone who's above you. If you feel like this is a work environment that would support that, right? Like if you feel like reporting the supervisor like would mean that like they have punishment or consequences, and it doesn't like fall back onto you. Unfortunately, the reality is that is sometimes not the case, especially in like smaller companies or nonprofits where like everyone knows each other, or it's really like a power game. And in that case, like sometimes you just have to like talk to particularly like your coworkers who are on the same level as you, and like maybe like find your allies, like I was saying earlier, and say like, hey, like this has been happening to me, this is happening to you. And sometimes like building up like more people who are in your corner like can help make your case stronger. Unionize. That's like kind of what I'm saying. If your place doesn't have a union. But no, seriously though, like that's really hard to leave, because like that's the reality. Like in some places, like it's just really hard to get that kind of change to happen without making it look bad on your record or affect you. And that is like, it's important to remember that's an option too. Like you don't have to be stuck in it. Can I swear on this? You don't have to be stuck in a shitty situation. I think a lot of us are used to like being in like compulsory education, for example, where like, you know, if you have a bad teacher, you're just stuck with that teacher and you have to like deal with it because you need this class to graduate. But like, even if it was really hard for you to find that job, if that job is making you miserable, if that supervisor is making you miserable and you don't think that like the workplace is doing anything about it, you can also just go.
Yeah. I think, yeah, Lena, you just like spoke on like those are all great points. Yeah, absolutely. I've unfortunately had way too many supervisors that have been the perpetrator. Unfortunately, it's been tough to even find like a mentor who is a woman of color, an Asian woman, or just like folk of color in like higher education, unfortunately, which has been really difficult. And then the perpetrators then, you know, are my supervisor. And so finding your people has been the most important, like self-care and community care for me. And I go back to like reporting is so crucial, and we don't report. Like so many of us do not report, and it happens to us, unfortunately, way too many times. You could either speak to the supervisor's supervisor, if you feel comfortable doing so. You can speak with someone from human resources, have assigned, you know, HR folks. You could also speak to confidential resources that are also there to listen as well. Sometimes we don't want to report, we fear repercussions, or that we think that nothing will be addressed, or we fear retaliation, or we just brush it off because it happens way too many times. But without reporting it, there is no collection, workplace climate, and then therefore it doesn't support, you know, folks of color. So if I could emphasize enough, report it, speak to confidential resources, speak to HR, find your people, find outlets to vent, be whole. And yeah. And if it is really terrible, you have to leave and evaluate, because if it's taking a toll on you, it becomes an unsafe and harmful environment, and not supportive at all. So
yeah, I also just like, as you were saying that, Eva, was reminded of like conversations that I had with my friends right after graduation when they were in their first jobs. And I just want to say, like, sometimes it's really hard to tell when you are being harassed or abused. Like, it's really hard, because like the people who are doing this, particularly if they're in power, like you're not the first person they've done this to. Like they know this game. They know how to make you feel like, oh, it must be my fault, or like maybe I just did something wrong because it's my first year working and like I made some silly like rookie mistake, and they're right to yell at me. Mm-hmm. But like a workplace should never make you feel down. Like if you ever find yourself feeling like dreading going to work, like dreading having to talk to your supervisor or your manager because you know they're gonna blow up on you or like they're gonna belittle you, I feel like a lot of us, like, I mean, for me, especially like just like as an Asian woman, like I have been trained to just like respect authority and like that authority is like always right. And that's really hard to unlearn. And that can be really detrimental in like a capitalistic workplace where the manager does not always have your best interests in mind. And I think that, again, like not to go back to the same old theme, but like the best defense against that is to have somebody, even someone who's not in your workplace, that might actually be better, just to like describe like the situation and be like, hey, like I feel really shitty today for some reason. Like I don't know why like this happened. And then your friend or your therapist or your friend can be like, hey, that actually is really wrong and like really rude of them. Like, to help you recognize sometimes when you're being taken advantage of or being put in a situation you don't deserve to be in. And there are like a lot of identities and traumas that can play into that, right? Like people, like my friends who are first gen, like sometimes it's just like people are like telling them that like they should be grateful even to have a job. And like that's not fair. And that's them being taken advantage of. So hard to recognize. Tell someone if you're not feeling certain, you don't deserve to feel like shit. This is my conclusion.
So I can't necessarily speak on like a supervisor in particular. I've been lucky enough to have like supervisors and like folks in jobs where like everyone like where actually most of them are people of color or like women of color. So I'm like incredibly grateful for that. Sorry if someone decided to just put out a motorcycle, you know, someone decided to like rev up their motorcycles. I don't know if anyone heard that. But I have like tips on like thinking about how to like how on developing like community, because I know folks talked about mentorship. And I think having a mentor, whether it is in your company or like in your organization, it can just be someone who can like who is in the same industry as you. Is really important to have that. I think, especially in the games industry, from my experience, is that we have an issue of women and like people of color being in there for like a couple of years and like leaving. I think the average basically lifespan of like a woman or like a person of, I think it's particularly in women game developers, is like 5 years. Where like eventually they just leave because they're being harassed, they're being like just abused in the company, or like basically the games industry has a lot of issues, and that's not the space to talk about it right now. But I think a really good important thing in my experience, how I stayed, is like the mentorship of just women of color, and just like other folks who are open to like having that kind of connection. That I'm lucky enough to have like a freelance writing community who are women of color, and just like all those intersections from marginalized communities. So it's like just to like echo what everyone else says, mentorship and finding a community is really, really helpful. Just to either like have people at your back when things go wrong, or just to vent, because we all need that. And then and another way to I've noticed is like also researching the company. Like for example, if you find a job that you're really interested in that like kind of fits, I would also say look into that company and just be like, what are their ethics? What is that? Like basically kind of just research their website. My industry is very online in the internet, like such as Twitter and like all those. So like it's really easy to dig up like stuff they've done bad. But it might be harder for other industries who kind of just are very they don't kind of put a lot of stuff on the internet. But also just asking those questions and seeing if folks, like maybe your circle knows by 5 degrees of separation that someone used to work there and it wasn't a good time for them. So it's really just doing that research initially can also really help you figure out, is this really good? Is this good for me? Because sometimes, like I said before, it can be hard to do the research, but the research can be very important to figure out if this company a good fit for me. Will I feel safe and comfortable? Is their company culture just really good that fits what I want and what I need?
Thank you all. I think we have time for one more question, and then I think we'll have to wrap it up. So I think There's a couple of questions to choose from, so I'm sorry if we didn't get to answer your question today. But again, we can share the email addresses of all of our panelists today if they feel comfortable with sharing that with you all, and you can feel free to reach out to them and email whoever you are wanting to ask a question from. This is a great networking opportunity, by the way. I was able to get guest speakers to this event because I networked and because I am able to attend these events and meet people that later in the future might be really beneficial to know these people. So just want to put that out there, that it's a great opportunity to network with our panelists today. But yeah, so we have a couple of questions. I'm sorry that if I don't choose your question, but I think the question that we'll go with is, if you transitioned from one place to another, what was the transition like? What were some of the challenges you faced? And that's for all speakers.
I feel like I'm talking way too much, but I also have an answer for this. So I did mention I was going from film to game design, which is a weird lateral change, but also at the same time, it's very different. So my challenges was that I didn't have a portfolio. I didn't have any games I worked on, like very little by the time I graduated, maybe like 2. So what was really important for me, this is just how I kind of fell into freelancing, was just kind of, I can only speak it from like a creative standpoint, that I was able to like do my own, just work freelance, kind of do more personal projects. And one kind of thing that I didn't talk about before was that I kind of was in the really right place at the right time. Is kind of like I happened to find like a call for pitches for an anthology series that was just looking for like anyone. They weren't like, you need like 5 years of experience. So I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to just submit something for this anthology, and it kind of just took off from there. So like a lot of the challenges was kind of like having to rebuild from like kind of scratch, really, of just like finding finding kind of like refinding of a community again. And I think what's really useful now, especially, is that we have the internet, where if you're like want to like learn how to do something, you can. You can be surprised about what a lot of things you can find that's not even creative. Like I think I figured out how to like I can figure out how to do my taxes, or I can like figure out how to do a lot of things online. So, and I know especially now that there's a lot of like online classes for free or for cheap. Unfortunately, a lot of these, there's a barrier to like, there's some classes where they're very expensive. So it is, I can't really say a very particular answer of how to switch, but it's just kind of like figuring out like where to start doing. For me, it was just doing a lot of research and how do I figure out finding friends and finding a community of people who are already doing that kind of field, and just asking like, hey, like I want to go into this field. What should I do? How did you get into it? And it might be very daunting to ask. I feel like there are way more confident people that will ask. And I also keep this in the back of my head. This is also the same thing with applying for jobs, is that like honestly, like a white dude probably will apply for that job with like maybe, so I kind of use that as a slight confidence boost. If that I don't hope that helps or not, but you know.
Thank you, Claire.
I just wanted to quickly offer the transition for me. The biggest has been moving to so many cities in a very short period of time, from Hawaii to San Francisco to undergrad, to Seattle for grad, to UC Santa Cruz for my first job, to then relocating to Chicago, Illinois, currently at DePaul University. So if there's any transition around relocation that I can support anyone in, feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Eva. Okay, so we are running very, very short on time, and we do end at 7 p.m., but we might just go a little bit over. I would just like to get a word of advice from all of the panelists here today. What are your parting words of advice for our soon-to-be graduating students? And if you could keep this to like 30 seconds or less, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. It can be very intimidating because sometimes you think you shouldn't be asking for something that you deserve or that you need, but just don't be afraid to advocate for yourself.
I think I would say we shouldn't have to leave our identities and triggers at the door of any place we choose to exist in. We should be able to come to the workplace as our full selves without having to justify our existence, merit, or ability to perform in any job. Find your voice, your experience and emotions are valid, and to ignore it can be really exhausting and dehumanizing. So you are all worth it.
I cannot imagine how stressful it must be. I had a really hard time with the job search when I was coming out of undergrad. So yeah, at this weird ass time where everything in the world feels topsy-turvy and yet at the same time nothing feels different. So I just want to say that you all are doing great and nobody knows what they're doing at this point in their lives. I still don't know what I'm doing, honestly. And you just have to keep at it and like, don't be discouraged if you fail because job searches are really hard and applications are really hard. And take this time to explore like who you think you want to be and like what your values are. Because COVID might change, right? Like diseases might change, the climate might change. But as long as that doesn't change, then you always have a clear compass.
For me is, I think, two really quick things. One, don't stress yourself out if you feel like you're not going anywhere, especially if it's just like a couple months in. Like, I kind of go by the saying of just like, well, be your authentic self, because like Ira said, like you shouldn't like leave who you are at the doorstep just to fit into a career, that because if you can't bring your personal self into a situation, then like that place is not right for you. And also like things will fall into their places eventually, no matter how long it takes. I feel like it might feel like an agonizing couple months because of COVID-19 and not finding a job and whatever happens. Things kind of just play out in your favor as long as you're like being yourself and just grinding out and not giving up. Because like I said, you'll find where you need to be is you'll get there eventually.
Thank you all. Once again, thank you so much. Huge round of applause to all of our guest speakers. Thank you for sharing your experiences, very deep and personal experiences, and thank you for sharing your words of advice. I know as an undergraduate student, I have 1 year left, and I'm excited that I have 1 year left because I could not imagine going into the workforce or even applying for graduate school right now. So it's a very daunting outlook for me, but I feel more comforted after listening to your words of advice. And I'm excited, and I know that a lot of our graduating students are also excited and ready to go out there and contribute to our world. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Once again, thank you all so much for sharing. One quick thing before we finish the session, I'm going to go ahead and excuse me, sorry. I'm going to share one more time. You all. So some resources after today's workshop. that you can access. One of them is called Better Brave. It's a nonprofit dedicated to tackling harassment and discrimination in the workplace. They provide a collection of resources on their website to help an individual combat workplace discrimination. So that's one resource. We also have another resource called Workplace Fairness, another nonprofit org that provides information about workplace rights. You can go to their links that are pasted right here, and we'll also share the presentation with all of the attendees after today's meeting, so you have access to these resources as well. And one resource that is coming up very quickly for anybody in the Bay Area, on May 31st, Impact Bay Area will be holding in, oh wait, I guess you don't have to be in the Bay Area, never mind, you can be on Zoom. You could be anywhere in the world because it's held online via Zoom. It's on May 31st from 3 to 4:30 p.m. You do have to pre-register, and the topic is facing AAPI, race-based harassment. And this is a 90-minute class that will introduce strategies that can be helpful in the face of race-based harassment, like adrenaline management, de-escalation, and verbal boundary setting, as well as bystander intervention. Registration is required, and you can go to their website linked right here on this slide to register for that class. I highly recommend it, and honestly, this was not planned at all. I was just on Facebook the other day, and Angry Asian Man had promoted this class, and I was like, whoa, I'm having a workshop on on anti-Asian navigating workplace harassment. Wow, what are the chances? So yeah, this is a great resource. Highly recommend it to all of our students. And then last but not least, or actually second to last but not least, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and WordPress. This month is AAPI Heritage Month, which is something that our Resource Center is currently celebrating every single day with a new blog post on our new blog titled The Market, created by one of our fantastic interns. So we are uploading new blogs every single day. I just did my post today, so if you want to go to wordpress.com APERC Market blog, you can find my post today about my history. If you care, that's totally okay. But yeah, it's me sharing my heritage, and also check out all of the other posts from our wonderful interns and other student contributors who've posted for Heritage Month so far. And then lastly, promise, thank you all for attending. Thank you guys so much. Your participation and engagement in our workshop has been so wonderful, and I'm very grateful to all of you for attending. This workshop was really, really important to me, and also small disclaimer, my birthday is in 5 days, so this was a great birthday present for me. So thank you all for coming, and thank you to my guest speakers for attending and sharing their stories with us. Please fill out our feedback survey after this workshop. The link is right here. It's a bit.ly link, so it should be easy to type workshop feedback. This gives us interns at APERC really useful feedback on what this workshop was good at, of what could we improve on, and how we can improve future events like these for y'all to attend. So yeah, that's everything from me. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. Thank you all once again. Enjoy the rest of your week, and thank you to our guest speakers